I'd like to welcome everybody to another one of our webinar series offered by the Toronto District School Board and OISE, the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. My name is Hilary Inwood, and I'm very happy to welcome you here today. We love seeing you as part of these webinars, whether you are here live with us or whether you are part of the audience that listens to the recordings afterwards. We love that you've taken time out of your very busy schedules to learn more about the very wide variety of topics we bring in as part of these webinars as part of environmental and sustainability education. My name is Hilary Inwood. I am lead of the Environmental and Sustainability Ed Initiative at OISE. I'd like to just give a brief welcome to a couple of members of my team who are here. Marina Lenzi-Marie, who is here with us. She's our Learning Garden Coordinator for this year and also an OISE student. And also Sarah Urquhart, who's one of our doctoral students. And is doing her best part to bring in the youngest generation. She's got her daughter Hazel with her today too. So hopefully Hazel's learning alongside you. There she is. Yeah, she's beautiful, Sarah. Thank you. I'd like to welcome also members of the Toronto District School Board's Eco Schools team, with whom we partner on so many of these wonderful learning events. So Pam Miller is instructional leader for that team, and Linda Nacarado is back on the team this year, and Chris Metropolis, who is our video editor extraordinaire for these videos. So thank you, Chris. Happy that so many people are in the room. If you're just entering with us now, please take the poll and let us know a little bit more about you as you come in. Today's topic is exploring the terrain of nature-based learning, and we're very pleased to welcome Jacob Rodenberg and Lisa Nesbitt. I'll tell you a little bit more about our speakers as we get underway, but they are wonderful people to learn from, and I'm really looking forward to hearing them. They've been on our schedule to have in for a little while, and I'm so pleased that we've finally been able to arrange that. This is what you can expect from today's session. We're going to do a short welcome. We already have, I guess. And we will do a land acknowledgement to begin. We're going to just introduce you very briefly to the OISE Learning Garden, and then we'll bring on our speakers. The community learning garden at OISE is small but mighty. That's what we like to say anyway. And it's, we think, a great place to help introduce nature-based learning in the heart of downtown Toronto. It's right on Bloor Street. It's a small garden, but it's filled with native plant species. It's got a great website if you'd like to learn more about it. Marina is actually the one always working on the website these days. So thank you, Marina, for doing that. And, you know, you can find lots of evidence of biodiversity and a wonderful, thriving ecosystem, even within, on this very, very busy thoroughfare in the heart of Toronto. So whether it's monarch butterflies or bees in the garden, these native plant species do a lot to cultivate not only cross-pollination, but also a lot of learning on our part as well. So we learn from this garden and we learn from nature. We do want to give our thanks to two groups. Ari Brown is here with us today from OISE, is representing the OISE Wellness Initiative, who has partnered with us on these 3 webinars about nature-based learning and educational gardening. And we're also happy to thank and recognize the support of TD Friends of the Environment Foundation that does such great work in supporting educational gardening across the country, in schools and colleges and universities and in community settings. So we encourage you to get to know a little bit about their granting programs, which are fantastic and really wonderful ways to seed a learning garden in your area. So I'm going to move on to the land acknowledgement. I asked Jacob today, one of our speakers, about does he have a favorite Indigenous artist he'd like us to feature, and his response was Norval Morrisseau. So Jacob, I did bring in this one for you, but that's not a hard stretch for me because I love Morrisseau's work too. So we've been doing artistic land acknowledgements to begin these sessions. And so let me just tell you a little bit about Norval Morrisseau. He is considered to be really the grandfather, if you will, of contemporary Indigenous art, or at least one of them in Canada. There's a couple of grandmothers in there as well, but certainly he's very well known and well respected for being one of the founders of what was called the Woodland School. He is known as Copper Thunderbird by his Indigenous name, and he was actually born on Sandy Lake First Nations, which is an Ojibwe community. He really has been known for not only portraying traditional stories in his work, but also a really wide range of spiritual themes and also political messages. So his work is vibrant, it's beautiful, and it's well worth getting to know much better. And we thank his spirit, because he is no longer with us, for for sharing this work with us. We acknowledge that we're hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people on this land. This is the TDSB's land acknowledgement, but we recognize that it is just the starting point for all of us in the work that we need to do towards decolonization and reconciliation. We had our first annual National Day of Truth and Reconciliation last week, and I hope that was a time of not only reflection, but really starting to think about how you're going to enact this work in your life, both personally and professionally, which is what we really all need to do in terms of the work that we do in reconciliation. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce you to our two keynote speakers for today. Lisa Nisbet is an assistant professor of psychology at Trent University. Her research encompasses personality, social, health, and environmental psychology, exploring individual differences in nature relatedness that she's going to be speaking about today. And also the links between human-nature relationships, health, happiness, and sustainable behavior. This work includes perceptions of various specific features and elements of nature, such as green spaces, blue spaces, which is a neat term, Lisa. You might have to tell us about that one a little bit more. That's a newer term for me. Wildlife, as well as the consequences of disconnection from nature. At the same time, following Lisa's talk, I'd like to introduce you already to Jacob Rodenberg. Jacob is the executive director of Camp Kawartha and the Kawartha Outdoor Education Center in Peterborough, Ontario. And no big surprise, given that Lisa's at Trent in Peterborough, this is how the two of them interconnect and support each other's work. Jacob has taught in the field of outdoor education for almost 30 years. He's currently, as I said, the executive director of Camp Kawartha, which is a summer camp, as well as an outdoor and environmental education center. It's a beautiful place. If you haven't been there, their building is just wonderful. He teaches also part-time at Trent University in environmental education. He's published a number of articles on children, nature, and the environment, and recently co-authored an award-winning book, which I'm going to give a plug for at the end, Jacob, called The Big Book of Nature Activities, which is just a fantastic read, co-authored with naturalist Drew Monkman. He's conceived of an environmental framework for children of all ages and is working with multiple stakeholders to implement this. It's called the Pathway to Stewardship and Kinship, and I'm hoping you're going to be telling us a little bit about that today, Jacob, as part of your talk. So welcome to both of you. We're really pleased to have you here today. And Lisa, I'll turn it over to you to begin.
So when I was thinking about what we're going to talk about today, I thought, in a way, you know, I'm maybe the why, and Jacob is the how. I do a lot of research on how people connect with nature, individual differences, how to motivate sustainable behavior, but I'm not the expert about putting that all into practice. So people like Jacob get me super inspired in the work that Hillary, you do, and all of you out there actually practicing these concepts in the real world. But I hope what I can give you is maybe a little bit of a background to convince you about why this is important. And I know we're talking about children and using this in the classroom, but I think it's also really important for us to understand about how this is affecting us as educators. And so what I thought I'd do today is give you a little bit of background research about why nature is good for us, and then go into some of the ways that we measure how people experience nature and the connection or disconnection they may have from that. And I do have a website should you be interested in checking out resources, and I'm also happy, I'll give you my email at the end to send you any background or something you're interested in. But naturerelatedness.ca has some resources as well. Alrighty. Well, I should also start off by saying there's lots of research on how much helping other people and pro-social behavior and gratitude is good for us. So I want to say that I work with some wonderful collaborators, including folks like Jacob and the folks at Camp Kawartha and the Environment Center. So I don't do all of this on my own. I do a lot of community-based research, and that stuff actually I've been doing more, and it really excites me. So maybe you all know this. I sort of feel like maybe I'm starting off with something very obvious, but not everybody is aware of the specific effects of nature and natural settings and even images of nature on physical and mental health. So we hear more and more about this, and I think actually during the pandemic it became really important to us. but we may not understand some of the mechanisms or the processes there. And there are some good books out there, organizations now that are working on this. The Society for Forest Medicine, Alan Logan wrote this wonderful book a few years ago called Your Brain on Nature. So it's getting lots and lots of attention, not just from scientists working away in a lab. And I think that's a good thing. But this actually started a long time ago. There's some early research looking at how patients recover after gallbladder surgery, and Ulrich used these quasi-experimental designs. Randomized controlled trial is difficult, but he thought, well, I'll look at these hospital patients and see what rooms they're assigned to for their recovery. And the folks that had views of nature out the window versus a building had less use of pain medication. Their nurses said they were much easier to deal with. They healed more quickly. They got released from the hospital sooner. And that spawned a whole line of research. Now, time in nature and exposure to nature is associated with better mental health. Of course, lots of sedentary lifestyle happens these days, but when you're exposed to nature, you're going to be more active. There's been some really neat research looking at how in places that lose their tree canopy, you see rising incidences of cardiovascular disease and respiratory problems. We forget sometimes what the natural environment does for us. We're immersed in it. We rely on it for survival. But some of these specific effects have been isolated through some interesting research. Light pollution is a big issue. You know, we're all on our computers and our screens all the time. People that have disrupted sleep schedules, when they put those folks back into nature on a camping trip and remove any of the artificial light from their environments, their sleep schedules regulate after about 3 days. And then there's been some large epidemiological studies. One of the most famous one was done by Mitchell and Poppin back in 2008, where they looked at all-cause mortality and mortality by heart disease in thousands and thousands of people in the UK. And they were also able to look at where they were, in other words, their proximity to green space. So they weren't measuring people jogging through parks and doing yoga outside. They were actually just measuring where people lived and how much green space was nearby. And the people that lived near to green space actually lived longer. What was interesting is there was an effect in that the poorest people who tend to not have green space in their area benefited most. So access to green space reduced this health inequality gap. So we know a fair bit from the literature that people that are disadvantaged and less well off financially tend to suffer more health problems and die sooner. Well, when people are closer to green space, it reduces that health inequality between the rich and the poor. That's really exciting, and it's why we should be all out restoring natural environments and also helping people access those places who normally wouldn't have the interest in doing so. So maybe it's good to think for a moment about the background about why nature might be good for us. We sort of intuitively think this, but there's a few theories that suggest this. Biophilia is this evolutionary theory, the idea that humans didn't evolve in concrete environments, and that it would have been important for our ancestors to understand where access was to water and the importance of biodiversity and a clean, healthy environment. It provided survival advantages. Now, difficult to test in evolutionary theories, but there is lots of other evidence and theories about why nature is so beneficial for us. One of the most popular, and I think it's really useful for all of us in academia, is this idea of attention restoration theory. So the built environment seems to reduce our attentional capacity. There's a lot of demands on us all day. On built environments and on screens, it actually draws down those resources that we have, and we only have a finite amount. Whereas nature seems to actually restore that depleted attention resource that we have. So, just like this little turtle, you might find yourself sort of zoning out the window. I do that sometimes. It's what's called micro-restorative breaks. And it seems that nature draws our attention effortlessly in ways that we're not even aware of. And it helps us become more focused and efficient concentrators when we go back to our task. And then there's another very large line of research about how nature affects the human stress response. This started out with that seminal research by Ulrich and the hospital studies, but it's really by the medical community in places like Japan, Korea, and Finland. And they see forest environments actually as part of their human health policy and programs. nature seems to affect. So heart rate, blood pressure is all reduced when you're in a forested environment compared to a built environment. And they do randomized controlled trials to test this. They some really neat mechanisms where they'll isolate some of the compounds, these aromatic compounds that are secreted by, in Japan, Japanese cypress trees seem to be partly responsible for these effects. So they'll treat hotel rooms and they'll find that there's better blood pressure and immune functioning for people that have been exposed to these phytoncides. And interestingly, it helps our immune functioning as well for up to months after we've been exposed, say, immersed in the forest for a weekend. They call this Shinrin-yoku. Doesn't really translate directly, but some people call it forest bathing. It doesn't mean scrubbing yourself with pine needles or snow, which sounds like there's probably some advantages too, but we're thinking more about taking in the forest air is the closest little translation. So all that suggests that nature is good for us. Great. Okay. Thanks. See you later. No. We have a problem. We don't always get outdoors. We don't always take advantage of nature. We don't always act on the evidence. And we humans are puzzling. I mean, I love teaching psychology and doing research on psychological effects because we are the most fascinating critters on the planet. We behave in lots of very inconsistent ways. So we know we're supposed to get enough rest and manage our stress and exercise regularly and get outdoors, but we don't necessarily do it. So the question becomes why? Why are we not taking advantage of all the benefits nature has to offer? And I don't like to pick on Toronto, but gosh darn, for some folks, depending on the community they live in, it's really tough. Even go to the bus stop and find nature or what we call nearby nature around you. So some of us don't interact with all the creatures in our ecosystem, and we may not be aware of those as well. So we seem to not necessarily know how important nature is for us. And my colleague John Zielinski and I did a study a few years ago where we actually asked people to predict how they'd feel. And we took a bunch of people and had them walk outdoors along a path that was similar to a park. This was on the campus at Carleton University, very similar to many university campuses. And then we randomly assigned another group to walk through tunnels. And not surprisingly, the people that walked outdoors, even for 10 minutes, were a lot happier. But what was interesting to us is that we saw a lot of people using the tunnels, even on really nice days. And so we've done some more versions of these studies, and we had people this time predict what their experience was going to be. And folks expected the outdoor walk to be better than the indoor one, but they grossly underpredicted it. So what happens here is that, you expect outdoors to be good, but you don't really realize how fantastic it is. And I am exaggerating for effect, but you don't really realize how phenomenal it is till you get out there and do it. So we make these effective forecasting errors. We underestimate the emotional benefits of nature. And I do this myself. It's freezing rain out, or it's cold, or it's dark, and I think, oh, I should stay at my desk and work and prepare that talk for tomorrow. But I never regret going for a walk. And there's this problem though. We're not always good at planning in the future about what's good for us. But it helps us understand a little bit about why maybe people aren't going outdoors. And some folks find nature really scary. They find it terrifying. Unfortunately, little kids are better at identifying brand names and logos these days than they are maybe at identifying, local flora and fauna. And nature very uncomfortable. They may not be used to it. We have lots of new Canadians who may see nature as very threatening and harmful. And there's research on this. So there's this classic study of Bixler and Floyd where they asked 7th and 8th graders, how disgusted are you by nature? How gross is it if you step in poop or you have a tick on you or something really icky happens? And it turned out that the ones that were more disgusted more easily by nature, they wanted to play inside, they wanted to avoid doing a lab about wetlands, and they didn't want careers that involve working outdoors in the future. So these ideas about nature get ingrained pretty early, and I think that's why there's this wonderful opportunity for us to get kids used to it, even kids that may be not getting that exposure at home if their parents are not comfortable or interested in nature. So getting outdoors is important, but the other thing we found is that people really do differ in their sense of connection to it. And this is sort of the majority of what I do in my lab is I study these individual differences in nature connectedness. You can measure it in a whole bunch of different ways. We have self-report scales. You can test out your own nature relatedness if you go to naturerelatedness.ca. We also use some Venn diagrams. There's a variety of ways to do this, but the key message is that people do differ. You would think, given the fact that we humans evolved in nature, we'd all be really connected, but we're not. So when we do research with community folks and students and people that are attending outdoor nature summits, they really do differ. People that work outdoors, folks that are interested in teaching about environment are more connected, but a lot of people are not. And that's a problem because they're missing out on some of the happiness benefits. So when you're actually in nature in the moment, it makes you feel good, makes you feel alive and vital, and it improves mood, reduces stress, those physical and mental health benefits. But it turns out that when you feel connected to nature and you have this bond with the natural world, even when you're not in nature, when you're sitting in an office or a classroom, you carry around that connectedness with you. And that seems to be associated with a whole bunch of indicators of subjective well-being. So people feel happier generally, even if they're not actually in nature, when they feel that strong bond with the natural world. So that tells me that maybe there's a reason to be working on how to cultivate this. Getting people out into their own communities, planting trees. We did a little research in Peterborough looking at how older adults benefited from having more trees on their streets. There was a big Toronto study on this a few years ago. We thought, well, let's look at how maybe this works in older adults. And if it works in the smaller places that already have a lot of trees. And so I had a wonderful student that went and used tree sampling software to look at the tree canopy density in these different neighborhoods in Peterborough. And what we found is that the more there was tree canopy around, the better psychological well-being of those older adults. In other words, they had less distress. They also felt more connected to their community too. So the presence of natural elements helps. We need to have those around us. And as Hillary mentioned, we measure blue space in our lab, proximity to water. We actually look at different elements of nature and what people enjoy and don't enjoy. And we found a few years ago that people who have that strong connection to nature actually seem to prefer all kinds of nature. So they like the snow and the ice and the sand and the rock just as much as the forests and the oceans. They're not as picky, but maybe for people new to nature, it's generally the green space and the blue space that's pretty popular. This connection also tends to motivate people to get outdoors. So folks in Australia look at how connected people spend more time in their backyards. People that are more nature related will go to parks more. They'll travel farther to get there. They'll seek out places with more biodiversity and vegetation. And there's now research coming out about how important biodiversity is for mental and physical well-being. So this sense of connection to nature is important, but how do we get people outdoors more? How do we encourage more contact? It's a bit of a challenge for some folks. We have especially busy indoor lifestyles. Well, we know we can change that sense of connectedness in the short term. So these walk studies, we know that we can boost feelings of connectedness in the moment. So repeated exposure is good, even if it's in small doses, even if it's what we call nearby nature, a local park. Doesn't have to be remote wilderness, doesn't have to be Algonquin Park or the Kawartha Highlands. It can be, by your local little forest or river. There's a lot of good interventions, and I won't get into this too much because I know Jacob's going to get into the ideal ways to connect people. But some of the nature challenges help. So making nature a habit, similar to any other habit, we would have to look after our health, like going to bed at a decent hour and brushing our teeth, putting on a seatbelt. Nature isn't something that we should just reserve maybe for the weekends. We need to incorporate it into our daily routine. But when we do those kinds of intervention studies, I worked with the Suzuki Foundation for a few years, just committing to spending 30 minutes a day in nature over a month really helped boost people's mood. It enhanced their sense of connectedness. Everybody had different amounts of nature starting out. And over the month of when we measured this, some people went up a lot, some people went up a little. But what we found is the more somebody boosted their nature contact, the greater the well-being benefits for happiness and feelings of energy and vitality. Ontario Parks has been running a similar type of challenge, and they're tying it to health. It's part of the Healthy Parks, Healthy People initiative that started in Australia. So that's a great source if you want to go look up some really good activities as well. There's a lot of public health initiatives about how to get people outdoors in nature. And making, parks free for day often helps. We found that when we do research with the Ontario Parks, people, even in the middle of the summer when people are already outdoors, people really benefit from, taking this pledge to spend 30 minutes a day and improve their health and well-being. One area I'm really excited about is citizen science. So this is a way to marry, I believe, to marry nature exposure, regular contact with environmental concern and conservation. So these are some folks down in the US that I work with that teach average people, students, military vets, community members, how to do non-invasive grizzly tracking, for example. They also work with kids. These are kids from a really underprivileged area in Oakland, California, and they teach them how to collect pika poop to learn about climate change and how it's changing pika habitat. So citizen science is great because it helps people learn about the places that are around them and the creatures that depend on those places, but also it gets people out into nature. So certainly you can do a lot of citizen science stuff online, and we've done some research on that too. I think the best way, though, is to actually get people out there in the environment. And what we found is that those citizen scientists, after doing a brief course, were feeling more positive mood, less negative emotions, and more fascination and curiosity with the world, which is a really healthy way to be curious about our environment. I think as educators, we need to keep curious and have that sense of wonder, because that translates to our students. I know you folks know all about the best ways to educate, but I keep reading research that says that students are most inspired by enthusiastic educators. You don't have to be the expert in everything. Sometimes it feels like it's hard to be the expert in one thing, but having that enthusiasm and passion. So that's why people like Jacob just motivate me to take my students outdoors and get them more interested in nature. We also did some work with citizen science, trying to help veterans. This is one of those online tasks, but I think for some people, maybe that's a way to ease them into it. They're not comfortable going out and, looking for poison ivy or dog strangling vine. Might be a way to do some stuff to let them learn a little bit about what their local ecology is, and then get them interested in how they can contribute and be part of a larger scientific community too. These military vets that we work with had less anxiety after doing some of these citizen science projects with us. So I think we should think more about nature as a human health resource. There's all sorts of great research by other folks that I won't talk about. My colleague John Zielinski at Carleton has a great TEDx talk on how we're nicer in nature. We really are. We're more pro-social. We're nicer to our neighbors. We get to know our neighbors more. Kids have less ADHD symptoms, and we're more open-minded. We're better at problem solving. And maybe too, when we're thinking about future generations, when we're in nature, we're also more concerned about it. We're more motivated to protect it, and we behave in a more environmentally conscious way. So, our challenge is, how do we make this happen? But there's lots of reasons why we should be trying to think about how do we cooperate. This is just a little example of when you test this in a laboratory. We expose people to either images of nature, watching a documentary of planet Earth, or an architecture video. And then we ask them to play a virtual fishing game where they have to pretend that they're fishing. And it's a commons dilemma. All of our natural resources are going to be things that are going to be used up if we don't manage them correctly. So when we do these kinds of experiments, what we see is when people are exposed to nature, they actually take fewer fish in their fishing season. So they play these little games. And, if you harvest too many fish, you deplete the resource. They can't replenish each year. And so people who think about nature, even just watching a video of nature, they tend to think and behave more cooperatively. I think that's really important because we're in an era where we need to cooperate to solve some of these global problems. And so if nature induces those feelings of pro-sociality, we should grab onto it. I know because you're all educators too, I wanted to throw in a little hint at some research that's out there. Frances Ming Kuo has a great website. She just did a big study a few years ago to try and overcome this concern that taking kids outdoors is going to make them wild and uncontrollable. She actually did a really good, rigorous, multi-stage experiment and with multiple different teachers controlled for a whole host of factors. And not only did the kids learn well outdoors, but they actually learned better when they went back inside. So it's important to reassure ourselves that we're not going to lose control of our classrooms if we take kids outside. So some really personally relevant information. And there's also some work suggesting that the number one reason that motivates teachers to take kids outdoors beyond risk management is their own sense of nature connectedness. So if we're not feeling comfortable and connected to nature, it's going to be very difficult for us to overcome some of those hurdles, administrative hurdles, insurance and risk management and all those things that maybe keep us from going outdoors more often. So I think our challenge is really to try and look at people that are disconnected from nature. How can we help them? And stop framing environmental issues as a moral issue. It's the right thing to do, or it's imperative we should. Stop guilting people into it. And think about this as really a way to promote and foster human health, and use a more intrinsic type of motivation as opposed to the pressure or the fear or the doom and gloom messages. I think we have that information, but we need to help people understand it's in our own best interest to connect with and look after nature. It's what we refer to as the happy path to sustainability. Being environmental and caring about the world and connecting with nature doesn't have to lead to a life of deprivation and sacrifice. We need to take action, but it's also something that contributes to our own well-being. So I've probably gone over my time. I just get so excited talking about this, but I'm super interested to hear about what Jacob has to say. So thank you for your attention, and do feel free to email me anytime if you'd like some resources, or if I can send anything along. I'm happy to chat with you or connect with you.
Lisa, thank you so much. That is fascinating. All of it. I was busy making notes as we went through. And it speaks so highly of the benefits of taking our students outside. Jacob, now that we know why we should be doing it, I'm hoping you can share more with us about how we should be doing it.
I'll do my best. Can you give me a 5-minute warning or something?
I absolutely can. Yep.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. And Lisa, it was just great hearing all the stuff that you had to say. So nice to have you all. I mean, I wish we were live and outdoors, but well, we'll make do with computers. I'd like to start off with a little poem by Diane Ackerman that I just love. And I'll just read it really quickly. In the name of the daybreak and the eyelids of the morning and the wayfaring moon and the night when it departs, and in the name of the sun and its mirrors and the day that embraces it and the cloud veils drawn over it and the uttermost night and the plants bursting with seed and the crowning seasons of the firefly and the apple, I will honor all life wherever and in whatever form it may dwell, on earth my home and in the mansions of the stars. One quote that has always inspired me is by Seaman Uganda, Kenyan youth worker. He said, instead of asking what kind of world we're leaving for our kids, we should ask, what kind of kids are we leaving for our world? And if you think about what a kid endures these days, the news they're hearing is overwhelming, mortifying. It's a scary world. Climate change, species depletion, habitat destruction, overpopulation. In a way, it's like we, this generation, previous generations, have given this world to our children. We're asking them to fix it. And they're saying thanks. And in fact, the scope of the problems, the magnitude of the problems is so overwhelming, it can be paralyzing. It can even turn kids into being apathetic. What's the point? How can I fix these overwhelming problems? There's a word for it. David Sobel, a well-known environmental educator, called it ecophobia. I've heard eco-anxiety. So really, what we're involved in when we take kids outside and connect to nature is inspiring hope. And I'll tell a quick story. You have to close your eyes for a second, work with me. Picture you're along the shore of a beach near an ocean. The wind, yes, the wind is tossing the waves. And an exceptionally high tide has strewn a whole bunch of starfish on the shore, and they're drying out in the sun. There's thousands of them. There's an old man with a cane walking along, and there's a young boy. And the young boy is picking up the starfish one at a time and whipping them back in. You can picture the legs spiraling and it splashes into the ocean. The old man gets irked after a while, and he goes up to the boy. He says, "Hey, kid, what you doing? There's so many of these starfish. What possible difference can it make?" The boy, with a twinkle in his eye, a smile on his lips, turns to the man, picks up another starfish, tosses it back into the sea, and says, "Makes a difference to that one." And there's the point, isn't it? That really action involves little tiny bits, and every bit is one drop, one bit more. And collectively, it can make a huge difference. So let's do this. Throughout every stage and every age of a child's development, let's give them the tools to be hopeful, activate and empower them. Whether it's planting a small pollinator garden, whether it's raising monarchs, whether it's planting a tree, whether it's making posters, every kid can get involved in some small piece of action, and that action is hopeful. One thing I want to talk about too is that, often we talk about having positive relationships with our friends, our family, and that's so key and important, right? We feel a better sense of belonging, of being complete when we have a family, when we have our friends, our community. But I would argue it's equally important with nature too, that we feel more complete, a sense of belonging, more whole when we belong to a place. So let's start thinking about the language of intimacy when it comes to nature. Like any relationship, intimacy with nature takes hard work, it takes perseverance, it takes commitment. But if we take kids out to the same places over and over again, they'll begin to build that. My wife, who runs a little Waldorf-based school, spends most of the time outside with the kids. And what she's done is she's imbued the landscape with a sort of an intimate language. There's the heart tree because it has a hole that looks like a heart. There's grandfather rock that's been there for millions of years. There's the twisted cedars. And in doing that, the kids imagine the landscape is not just a bunch of objects to be used for consumption, but it is full of life and being. A principal friend of mine once was walking to school, and the kids said, "Hey, Principal, mister, what's that bird?" And it was scurrying across the parking lot. And being a wise educator, he said, "Oh," he knew what it was. Let's go check it out. So he got a book, a field guide. They flipped through the pages, and they found out it was a killdeer. And they found that killdeers nest on the ground. So they noticed that, there was a nest in the middle of the parking lot, a scooped out hollow and 4 speckled eggs. And suddenly the kid said, "Oh, mister, we need to put some pylons around to protect us from the cars." So they did that. And then the wise principal gave them binoculars. And over time, they got to know that killdeer, protected it. So it didn't become any killdeer, it became their killdeer. They built a relationship with it. And that's the heart of good nature education, building relationships with that, which is what is around you. Something I love to do that comes from Paul Elliott, a colleague of mine, and Hillary knows Paul well. It's called homesing the leaf. You could do this with any object. It could be a leaf, it could be a rock, it could be a twig. But you ask kids to pick a partner, and you pick up a leaf, and then you talk about Sherlock Holmes. Watson was always intrigued by how it was that Sherlock knew so much about everything. To which Sherlock would say, "My dear Watson, you see, but you do not notice." So you take the leaf, and then you ask the question, "I notice." Well, what do you notice? Well, I notice that the leaf I have ends in a point. I notice the edge is serrated. I notice that it's colored one shade on one side, another shade on the other. Oh, I notice the veins are more pronounced on the other side. Next, of course, if you're noticing things, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? So you can use the statement, "I wonder." Well, I wonder why my leaf is pointed. I wonder why the stem is not totally round, but it's a little rectangular. I wonder why there's a little hole in it. From that, you could then say it reminds me of, this leaf reminds me of how ephemeral autumn is. This leaf reminds me that one day a new leaf will grow in its stead, but this leaf will help to grow soil. This sequence is lovely because it starts with observation, it then arouses curiosity and it helps people to make connections. And really, connections are what it's about, and so is curiosity. For me, curiosity is the engine of learning. And if you can promote, stimulate, inspire curiosity, kids are always going to want to learn more. So how can you do that when it comes to nature? Well, you can start with using language, evocative language. I can't tell you how many times I've come across a parent or a teacher who said, "Oh, put that down, John, that's dirty, that's messy." Or "Yuck, that's disgusting." Like a rat-tailed maggot. First glance, it does look kind of disgusting, but actually it's amazing. This little larva of a fly has a long tail that acts like a snorkel, so it can breathe even in muddy puddles or in saturated ground. Instead, use a language of wonder and awe. Even if you're a little uncomfortable, it's still amazing. Look at that spider's web. How did it do that? And you can also try just reframing nature a little bit. Sometimes I take kids to a pond and say, "Hey, do you want to catch a jaw-thrusting, jet-propelled underwater bug snatcher?" Who wouldn't be intrigued by that? So you catch one. What is it? It's a baby dragonfly. Baby dragonflies have a folding labium that can unfold and catch other bugs. You could have fun with that. Perhaps you can talk about a wind-soaring acorn snatcher, which is a flying squirrel. Or what about a green-faced, sweet-smelling suncatcher? That's the cedar tree. Maybe make a poster and have kids do a bit of research on each of those animals. At the end here, I'll show you some links to a whole bunch of scavenger hunts that you can do through every season of the year that just gets kids looking, observing, and noticing. This is a little scavenger bingo that I created so you can go across, down, diagonally. One thing I love is I say to the kids, "Hey, I wonder if we could find some Earth submarines or a shapeshifter, maybe a baby dragon." And what we do, we call them basement windows, is we go for a walk. It could be in the schoolyard, it could be a nearby park, and we lift up logs and we peek underneath. And there we'll find earthworms, which are like underground submarines because they burrow in the ground and they let air into the soil. Salamander is a little bit like a baby dragon. A pill bug, the little tiny bug, can roll into a ball. That's a shapeshifter. I remember taking my kids on a hike when they were young up to a beautiful overlook. And there you could see lakes sparkling in the distance, tall trees. And what my kids were doing? They were looking at the ants down by their feet. Kids have a lot to teach us about the very small, the contracted environment, and that's often where their attention is. So create a micro trail and give kids a bunch of tongue depressors or popsicle sticks, a long length of yarn, and just get them to create a little trail. Maybe it goes from a rock covered in moss to a tiny hole in the ground to a tiny spider's web. Each place that you find something interesting, you stick the popsicle stick in. And you connect the popsicle sticks with the yarn, so it's making a trail. And then have kids take another group of kids along and show them the spots along the trail. I love taking a little digital microscope and attaching to my laptop. You can see the most amazing things in detail. I don't know if anyone can guess what that is, but that's a picture I took. It's a picture of cedar. Here's a picture of a feather. There's so much beauty in the very small. Oh, the thing I've been really fascinated with lately, we're spending so much time as a modern society in front of screens. Really, we're only activating our sight and our hearing, but the other senses are being missed. Our sense of smell, our sense of taste. And I really believe that the more we can activate our senses, the more we can drink the world in, just like a sommelier, and the more we can appreciate it. So here's some activities that might help kids to do that. I have a link to some sensory nature scavenger hunts. This is great. You take these out, these little discs, you laminate them if you can with some clothespins, and kids try to find. They can even pin what they found on it to try to match. So maybe they found a piece of bark that matches. I always try to practice reciprocity. thinking like a tree, to give more than we take, do more good than harm. So if I'm harvesting a little bit from here, I'll plant some seeds. That's just a few examples of these little scavenger hunts you can use that you'll have access to. Framing nature. In the schoolyard, nearby green space, you could hang up some rope and just hang some empty frames. It could be made out of paint stirs, or just put clothespins to a branch. There you have a beautiful, and simply by isolating a bit of nature, you see it in a different way. You can try that old photographer's trick where you take one hand with a thumb down, turn your other hand the other way, put it together, and boom, you've created a frame. And by isolating parts of nature, you begin to see it in different ways. Use cardboard images to do the same thing. Cut out of a butterfly or a heart. You know, we humans are born with remarkable sense of sight. We have the eyes of a predator. To test that out, close one eye, try to touch your nose. Both eyes perceive objects at a slightly different angle, and that's what gives us depth. You can even try with your fingers on either side. How far back can you see your fingers wiggling? What I like to do when I go for a walk with kids is practice splatter vision. Often when we walk in the woods, we tend to look at our feet. But by flipping our hands around, looking behind us, looking above, just splattering our vision all over, we see more. And our eyes are geared towards detecting movement. Here's a few simple hearing activities you can do in the schoolyard. If you take your two hands, cup them together, put them behind your ears and push forward, you can hear 10 times better. Or you can try Jacob's handy dandy homemade sound catchers. Just a piece of cardboard, a curve and shape to the side of my head, and put it all in. It's amazing how much better you can hear with those. And focus on the soundscape that is occurring in your backyard, in the schoolyard. You may hear chickadees, you may hear blue jays, you may hear a woodpecker. Practice lyricism. There are people that simply by listening to the sound of the wind caressing tree branches, you can get a pretty good idea of what kind of tree it is. Is it white pine? Is it an oak? Try to tune into those tree songs. Make a sound map where you have a piece of paper and get kids to close their eyes and focus on different natural sounds and where they're coming from, and just draw it on a piece of paper. Tuning into birdsong is a lovely way of sort of being with friends. You know, you recognize your friend's voice. Wouldn't it be nice if you can recognize the sounds that are part of your neighborhood, your community? So sometimes mnemonics is a simple way for you to be able to identify different birds. For example, the well-known chickadee-dee-dee-dee. In the spring of the year, it says, sweetie. Or the mourning dove, there's nothing to do. It's pretty easy to have a few simple sayings that help recall the cadence and the sound, the tone. Here's a few I've made for you, and you probably could make your own. But in and around cities, there are lots of birds that you'll hear and get to know. You could try feelie bags, just a pillowcase or a bag or even a paper bag, and get kids to focus on the textures of things. So you'd be surprised at how many different cones there are: spruce cones, pine cones, fir cones. And just get kids to really focus on the different textures, how those seeds are organized. Drink the world in through your sense of smell. One of the things I love doing is a little scratch and sniff. What I'll do in non-COVID times is I'll have a sponge for each shell, a piece of sponge, a little bit of water, and we'll wet our upper lip. And simply by doing that, you smell much better. Well, it's not that you smell better, it's just you smell more effectively. And create little smell cocktails. So have a cup, get them to harvest a little bit of soil, a little bit of grass, a little bit of leaves, and then give it a name. Maybe you call it Naturetopia, whatever. Take a swivel stick. By crushing it, you release this those aromas. It's beautiful. You can take some mint extract or lemon extract and just drizzle a little bit here and there and create trails. At the end of it, you could have a little mint. Fox can smell 10,000 times better than we can. We get a sense of the sensory world of a fox by following scent trails, because they really recognize the world through their nose. I have a book coming out I thought I would mention this spring called The Book of Nature Connection, which is filled with sensory activities. And if you're interested in finding out more, you can take a look at that. Other things I love, having kids create little gnome homes, activate their imagination. Here are some things our kids made, and they're lovely. You know, these days, everyone talks about sustainability. I personally think that word isn't robust enough. It doesn't have enough power. What we need is a better word. The word we need to love is regenerative, saying we can bring nature back. So simply taking a little bit of the schoolyard, maybe talking to the custodian and the principal and saying, just don't mow that corner. Leave that corner alone. And then let that corner grow wild and throw a hula hoop down on the mown part, and then later on throw a hula hoop down on the part that's grown. And you'll see how much more life there is in that one grown part. My hero, Drew Monkman, who I wrote the big book of nature activities with in the 1990s, looked at a schoolyard and said, boy, that's an expansive just lawn. I wonder if we can do something about it. So he got together with the teachers and the parent council and the students, and they designed a little natural area. And that's what it looks like today. And what he does is he's retired now, but he had the junior kids teach the younger kids, becoming sort of nature supervisors. They laid down scavenger hunts, and he also worked together with the local naturalist club. They made bird houses, bird feeders, sold them to raise money to buy even more plants. So you too, and even just by leaving something alone, it comes back.
And Jacob, you asked me to give you a time check, so it's one more minute or so.
Oh, really? That's all?
Yeah.
Okay, it goes fast. So,
It does.
I promised some resources, so let me just go back here. This is Jacob's Poor Time Management.
The good news is that you got not only the new book coming out, but I've got, to wrap up, I've got the cover of your existing book. So
Okay, nice. I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about the Pathways program, which is a community-led initiative, and it's saying if we want kids to be stewards and caretakers of the earth, who's responsible for that? And the argument we make is it takes a village. So we have a whole bunch of people working on this, from the university to college, to us, to 40 other organizations. And what we've done is created a guidebook, and through there, we've come up with 40 landmarks, 40 what we think are key essential experiences that all kids ought to have from the time they're born to the time they graduate from high school to be that engaged steward. And I have, right here, a little link towards the end, which gives you a chance to look at that. So I have a whole bunch of other things to talk about from citizen science, but if I make this accessible to you, then hopefully you can visit all these different sites, from learning how to raise monarchs, to tracking migration, to citizen science websites, to other books. And I hope it's useful to you. The big thing is, as Lisa said, getting kids outside on a regular basis is not only good for them, but it's good for the planet. And hopefully we can foster future stewards, future caretakers of this land. I think we need it now more than ever. Thanks.
bravo. Thank you, Jacob. Oh, Jacob, you've got so many wonderful ideas how to implement the very theories that that Lisa is providing evidence for in her research. So such an excellent combination between the two of you to understand why we should be doing this work, but also how we can do this work. So what a fabulous presentation from the two of you today. I'm going to share, if you can stop sharing your screen just for a minute, Jacob. Yeah. We will, by the way, get the resources from both Lisa and Jacob, and we will share those with you after today's webinar. We always send these out to everybody who is on the registration list. I just want to do a shameless plug for Jacob's book, which is called The Big Book of Nature Activities. This one is currently available, and I'm so pleased that you're following it up with another one, Jacob. I'm sure that this next one will be just as popular as this one has been. And I just want to point out too that Pam and I have been in connection with Cornell University over the years. They've done some wonderful work in urban environmental education, and they've got a new course coming up on nature education. It is a very low-cost course. It's online and led by experts at Cornell University, including Marianne Krasny. So we can recommend these courses, and we'll provide the link for that in the resource package as well. Just to wrap up, we have got upcoming webinars coming up as well. We've got Dillafreeze Williams, one of my favorites from the University of Portland in the States. This is the joy of webinars, as we can bring in people from all around the world to these talks. But we've got our own homegrown experts like Lisa and Jacob to draw on too, which is pretty fabulous. We're going to hear from TDSB educators leading climate action during the pandemic. And finally, please save the date. We're hoping to launch in the next day or two the information so you can start registering for the free conference that the TDSB and OISE offers, and this year focused on climate courage, educators who are addressing the climate crisis. And we've got so many wonderful webinars that will come and workshops that will come about as part of that as well. So I am going to encourage people to stay with us if they'd like to ask questions of Jacob and Lisa, but can you please join me right now in thanking them for a wonderful talk today, a really inspiring talk on nature-based learning. Thank you to both of you.